Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. People are watching us from different parts of the planet, and I want to welcome you to this very interesting panel where we will be discussing the energy outlook for Latin America. I am joined by Francisco Monaldi, the director for the Latin America Energy Program at Rice University, and Ali Moshiri, ex-president of Chevron Africa and Latin America, and also currently the CEO of Amos Global Energy. They are two great experts, and I'm very happy that they were able to join us for this conversation. My name is Aldo Flores, and I am a visiting professor at the LPJ School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas in Austin. The subject for this conversation is quite challenging to cover because Latin America is vast. It's very difficult to speak of the region as just one single unified energy market. We have South America being its own very large geographic zone, Central America doing its own thing, and Mexico being part of a North American market. So it is not that easy to cover the region and speak of the outlook of the region as a whole, which means that we will be speaking of more specific cases focusing on key countries that are very important for energy in the region and the world. The other thing to keep in mind about Latin America is that it is perhaps the only region in the planet or sub-region in the planet that has, it's a net energy exporter. It's a surplus producer of energy in hydrocarbons and in renewables. That makes its position quite unique, although we don't have every country in the region producing every energy source, and not all of them are net energy exporters, but the region is a net energy exporter. And the other very interesting thing about this is that it's a net hydrocarbons exporter, but also it has a major surplus in renewable energies. The cleanest energy matrix in the planet, energy mix, is Latin American. And this reality is now interplaying with what we have witnessed in the past year with new trends that are emerging with the COVID-19 epidemic and some other structural factors that have been playing a role in a very important and fundamental way. But if we just focus on what's going on with supply and demand, we're seeing a world with reduced demand, a world where we have witnessed incredible movements in prices. As you may recall, oil prices were negative for a day in the middle of the summer last year. Investment in the industry globally has fallen yet again for the third time in the last 6 years, which means there's a consolidation of resources and a rethinking of strategies. We have been also with a greater interest for addressing climate change. 2020 was one of the warmest years on record. And of course, this means that there's greater emphasis on renewable energies and greater attention to what might happen to transportation technology, electric vehicles, more attention as well to what remote work will mean for the future of demand and the like. Together with these trends, we're seeing some new variables that will be playing a very important role. The Biden administration that is about to take office is set to promote renewable energies and perhaps temper activity in frontier areas for the oil industry. If there is such an emphasis on renewables, then Latin America will have many opportunities to play an important role in this expansion. And there's also a reconsideration of how best to finance energy projects in the world and certainly in the region. It's not just that investment has fallen, but financing is currently being rethought in terms of what is the best approach to rely on financing from international financial institutions, combinations of public and private investment, public investment. What is it that will be required to make the new energy demand or the new energy world a reality? So we will be discussing this and other factors. And I will ask first Francisco Monali to give us his perspective on the outlook for the region, and then Ali Moshiri, and then we will go into the discussion. Francisco, please.
Great. Thank you, Aldo. It's a pleasure being with you and Ali and sharing this conversation among friends. As you argued, I mean, it's hard to make general statements about the region, but I will, in my first sort of remarks, will try to do a little bit of that. So as everyone knows, COVID has had a significant toll, but in Latin America, it has been worse than in the rest of the regions of the world in terms of both death and contagion. And that has also led to the worst economic performance of any region in the world in 2020 and perhaps in 2021. And that comes after a few bad years after the commodities super cycle ended. So that will bring a potential for political instability and populist regimes in the region, and perhaps even to some collapse of some democracies in the next decade or so. However, there are tremendous opportunities in the region in oil and gas for investors. I mean, Latin America has the largest resources outside of the Middle East in oil and gas. It has relatively low geological risk and relatively low cost in some countries. The continent is it's open for business, except Mexico is going in the opposite direction. But that doesn't mean that every country is going to be able to attract foreign investment, because some do not have the right conditions, like Venezuela today under sanctions and the current regime. However, a savvy investor can obtain very significant returns by investing right now in the Latin American oil and gas sector if it finds the right opportunities and know how to mitigate the risk. Having said that, and to make a final point, if you look at it from the perspective of the countries, I'm afraid that most countries will not fulfill their potential. There are countries like Brazil that are doing everything that they need to do to really fulfill the oil industry potential, but many others, for a variety of reasons that have to do with their institutional environments, the investment climate, and the issues that I mentioned about political instability, unfortunately, will not fare as well as Brazil. So overall, I would say there are a ton of interesting opportunities, but unfortunately, the region will not fulfill its potential. Thank you.
Thank you, Francisco. Ali, so Francisco sees a world of potential and some political roadblocks in the way to make the best of this potential in Latin America. How do you see the future of this region?
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Aldo and Francisco. Great to be with you. Before I get to that point, let me within a few seconds explain that especially oil and to some extent gas is integrated globally. You got to look at the holistic part of the equation, then we get into the Latin America. I want to leave you with this 3 parameters. We are not running out of resources. There's plenty of resources globally to meet any demand that we are forecasting. Number 2, production. There will be sufficient production. The technology, the availability of the capital will be able to create the production that needed. The question is going to come up on the demand side. One of the major companies indicated 3 pessimistic view of the future demand. I personally disagree with that. I think we're going to have a demand at the benchmark of 100 million barrels oil per day. Post-COVID, I think the recovery is going to be much better than what is forecasted. I think we're going to have an acceleration of economic growth, and oil is going to be a significant part of that equation. Therefore, if you look at the short term and midterm, I think we're going to have a little bit of uptick on the production growth. Getting into Latin America, how Latin America play a role in this? I totally agree with Francisco. Reserves are there, production are there. The question here is how they can become more part of the better community of the production, because considering the resources they got, really the contribution is not as significant as it should be if you put Brazil to the side. When you look at it, it's really a limitation of the capital flowing to Latin America. It's not resources, it's not geology, it's a matter of how you get the capital coming into those countries and why there are obstacles for capital to flow in. Estimated that about $700 billion of capital, private capital, is available. How much of that is going to go into the oil and gas sector, and how much of it is going to go into the Latin America? At the moment, is very small. If you look at the investment ratio that you see, Latin America is not getting its own fair share. Partially is because Latin America, majority of the countries are stuck in 1970 national oil company mentality, that the oil is belong to the people, it got to be in hands of the people, it got to be run by government, it got to be blah, 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 and goes on. The current environment and capital structure doesn't need that. That's the reason most of the capital that's supposed to go to Latin America end up in the United States. If you look at it, if there is a barrel to be produced in Permian in the United States versus somewhere in Latin America, most likely the money going to flow into the US side. That's got to be reshaped. How it got to be reshaped? Some of it is stability of the contract and a stability of what you bring into the investors. For example, the dynamic in Latin American political system create uncertainty in the oil and gas investment. Mexico is a good example of that. Not very long ago, it went completely changing the constitution, open it up, and everybody rushed into Mexico. Suddenly the change bring a little bit of, quite a bit of instability in how the investment should flow back in Mexico. Therefore, I'll leave you with this, that yes, the potential for resources, production, everything is in Latin America, but the challenge is how you get the investment flowing to Latin America. And if you look at it also from market point of view, all the public traded company operating in Latin America outperform the North American companies. Therefore, that's one indication that yes, indeed, what Francisco was saying is true. If you get in low operating costs, low cost of funding and development, it will give a better and greater return than any other place.
Thank you, Ali. So, Francisco, what do you think would have to change to make the best of these opportunities? Ali has given us more color on this challenge, and that I will summarize it in terms of the investment regime. Venezuela is a challenge. Mexico has become, the investment environment has become less certain. Brazil is readjusting part of its strategy. Argentina was moving very strongly with its own shale patch in Vaca Muerta, but now things are being rethought there, given all these changes in world energy demand and supply. What do you think can change or should change in the region to make this potential happen?
Sure. So as Ali said, we have had these, cycles of resource nationalism in the region, this volatility in policy that has created this, I think, the lack of fulfillment of the great potential in the region. But we can, talk about a specific sort of countries about what they have been doing. And so Brazil is, I think, a good example of a country that has a long-term horizon in their policies and has been spectacularly successful. And you can see this revival of deep waters in Brazil and now in Guyana and maybe Suriname, which is pretty interesting and very highly productive fields. But they have done a lot of the things in terms of building the institutional capabilities, an independent regulatory agency, a strong national oil company, and the like. They had their bumps in, they had some difficulties in the last decade with some of the changes that President Lula implemented, but Brazil has gotten it most of it right. Then you have a country like Colombia that has done a lot of things right, but they don't have the resource potential that the big countries have. And then you have countries, like Argentina and Venezuela with this massive potential, and of course, Mexico, that unfortunately are not, creating the investment climate and the policy environment to get the significant investments that they could get. Nevertheless, for example, Argentina, because of the nature of the short cycle, shale investments, they will get some if the price, international prices are right. And in Mexico, I think the deep water and the offshore development will continue. And the thing is that these countries really need private investment. They are in a situation in which, most of them, their national companies are not going to be able to do the investments. And so they have to get their act together. Otherwise, they will lose this sort of last window of opportunity of developing these massive resources.
Here's a question, and either of you can take it, but let me begin with Ali. We have this reality of a region that is still, as a whole, uncertain of where it wants to lead the investment environment. So Francisco has just given us a summary of where this map is. But we also have extra regional potential partners that are interested. We have, for example, China making inroads in Latin America. And China is arguably a country that is also comfortable with the idea of national oil companies and partnering with governments. China doesn't have one national oil company; it does have a number of them that also compete. But what does that mean for the region? Is there a greater potential for China to come in? And in a while, we will also discuss that in the context of the U.S. and its own political and energy agenda with the new administration. Ali?
Well, first of all, for China to move into Latin America that they have done is not really a stimulate what we are talking about. China is really looking for the oil supply. They are not necessarily looking for the development. They are not really looking for the return. And if you want to stimulate the economy of a country, you have to bring the capital, create jobs, make the economy work. The three countries that Francisco pointed out, the problem, the investment is not going there. It's not necessarily the political. It's underlying dependency to the oil revenue. You take Venezuela, Argentina, Mexico, but you take a country like Brazil, the reason it has been successful because it got a diverse and huge economy. When the COVID happened, Brazil wasn't as much as impacted as a country such as Ecuador. Venezuela, can add Ecuador to that. Therefore, to answer your question, I think Latin America needs less of Russia, China, Iran, and needs more of private capital. Because private capital and public capital ask for performance. I'm right now in the capital market, I have to tell our investor, and when I work for the largest company, Chevron, the focus is return on the capital. You expect to provide return. And when you do that, you stimulate the economy of the country. And when you stimulate that, then you bring credibility to the investors. You take Argentina as an example. They got a vast resources. Vaca Muerta is probably one of the best unconventional resources I've seen it. But underlying economy of the country is preventing the capital flow to the country. And that's got to be done. It's not going to be done by Chinese. It's going to be done by private capital to come in and stimulate the economy, create the capacity for the government to allow the profit to be transferred to the investors. Therefore, that's what it's I see as requirement for Latin America, not necessarily other large national oil company coming in and trying to stimulate the economy.
So let me then take this and shift gears a bit, but to focus on renewables. So one question with the idea of promoting private investment and private capital, a view that I share, is that this emphasis has not necessarily led to the type of economic justice and energy justice that many believe must become a reality. So the emphasis is now on creating an energy system that is welfare to the environment, fair to society, and creates quality jobs. And now the idea is that a green recovery post-pandemic and greater emphasis on clean energy technologies and renewables is a way to accomplish just that. The Biden administration is coming into government in just over a week. And this means that there will be a greater emphasis on renewables. The question is, are we facing the same type of challenge in terms of the investment environment for renewables in the region as we're seeing in hydrocarbons? Or is there a better opportunity, a more open road to get to produce this type of green recovery and more jobs? How do you see this unfolding, Francisco?
Yeah, that's, I think, a very interesting question, and there are a lot of sort of different angles that we can analyze it. I mean, in the first thing is that, as you point out, both the Biden administration and the multilateral agencies are going to be focusing in the next few years on sort of helping Latin America on the energy transition. And that will be, in the case of the Biden administration, a big shift with the Trump administration that, for example, tried to help a lot Argentina to develop Vaca Muerta. I'm afraid that they might not take into account the importance of, for example, natural gas as part of the energy transition. I think Latin America needs to develop a lot of natural gas in order to move into the required energy transition. And of course, I agree with Ali that there is still tremendous, potential in oil that has to be developed, and that will help these economies grow back. I mean, many of them are very dependent on oil, so it is required. In terms of renewables, you have first the issue that, as you point out, Aldo, the matrix is very green in Latin America, but mostly because of hydro, right? And hydro, for a variety of reasons, the local communities, even multilaterals are not that eager to support hydro. So the hydro, I don't think, is going to be able to, to fulfill the need for an increase in electricity production in Latin America. That's in part why I think natural gas is relevant. And as you point out, then what about solar and wind and maybe hydrogen? I think that the challenge there is that if we have had trouble, even attracting investment in a super high return industry like oil, and if you don't have strong institutional frameworks that guarantee, for example, investors that they will recoup their investment in renewables, I mean, that's a sector that has a smaller margin, that is highly regulated, electricity is, and that has a history in Latin America also of, for example, setting tariff, particularly if there is inflation at not attractive, the company is not obtaining a significant return. So I think there is massive potential, and Latin America has gotten tons of renewables, investment in renewables in the last decade. It's very impressive what some countries have achieved, including Mexico, in which you were part of that reform. But I think there are challenges, the similar challenges in terms of the politics and the institutional environment to attract those investments.
And then, Alice, how do you see then do you share this perspective? What does the Biden administration mean for Latin America?
I think from my point of view is the transformation from where we are to the renewable, it takes decades and decades and decades. It's a momentum. It's a policy momentum, it's a political momentum, but it's not the investment momentum, especially in Latin America. Latin America current economy is so bad during the COVID and even post-COVID that the objective got to go towards industries that create jobs, take advantage of the opportunity that is in there to contribute to the energy equation. And from my point of view is take Argentina. Trying to create an industry, renewable in Argentina, bring the foreign investment into the country, you have the same fundamental problem as if you produce in oil. You cannot be able to get the transfer your asset outside the country. Therefore, that's got to be solved. And to solve that is to creating jobs. Take advantage of what it is on your table to work with. For example, I use Argentina. Argentina as an example. Argentina Vaca Muerta production could be in the order of 2 million barrels a day. And if, just assuming if it's producing 2 million barrels a day, how many jobs that would be created, how it can stimulate the economy and so forth. I'm not saying renewable is not going to be there. I think it's going to be there, but few decades down the road. The part that we got to make sure that the policy and politics doesn't get ahead of what is pragmatic. What is pragmatic? The approach we got to take to meet the current demand of what we need to move the global economy forward and regional economy forward. Country like Venezuela. Venezuela, definitely economic recovery of Venezuela is going to come up from the oil production. Whether or not we like it or not, whether or not how you're going to look at it, it is. We've done a great study. We are raising funds to jumpstart the oil industry in Venezuela post-sanction. And everybody recognizes that. That is part of it. Now, again, I'm not against it. I think renewable is going to be part of the equation, but in the short term, mid-term, the best thing for Latin America, focus on what you have on your table and try to get the best benefit out of it. Country like Venezuela, if they don't do that, lots of those barrels are going to stay in the ground because I think eventually renewable is going to take over. But that's several decades down the road.
Ali, let me stay with you. So we have this policy and politics challenge in the region. What about financing? What would be, assuming the politics are fine, the policy is there, what would be the appetite and what type of instruments?
Just to be transparent on my thought, I think you can raise money for oil and gas investment in Latin America much faster than you can do for renewable. Because again, if you go and invest money in renewable in a country, any country you want, that's going to be for domestic consumption. You won't be able to export electricity. Latin America needs foreign currency, doesn't need more internal consumption. It needs to bring more foreign currency into the country. You look at, I use Argentina as an example. I mean that if you look at Argentina, today's economy is need to be rebuilt before even for oil and gas to go back in there. Therefore, from investment for renewable, I think it's going to be a challenge. There are going to be some symbolic. There are going to be few that basically push the policy and politics forward by creating certain environment. But on the mass side of investment, I really doubt it. And I'll close by this. Investors, whether or not you're a publicly traded company or you're a private capital, they have to provide return to the investors. And if somebody show me how you can do that, then I think the investment going to go that direction. And I don't think that's going to happen in the short term.
So Francisco, the returns are there. The financing in principle could be there if all these shifts in policy and obviously politics take place. Do you see any other variable playing a role here?
Well, I wanted to say that in terms of the types of investors and investment, you will probably see a shift, right? Because we are seeing some of the European companies, more prominently BP and Shell, moving out of oil in some ways, and clearly they are not eager to look for sort of greenfields in Latin America, maybe some in natural gas. And that, first of all, I think will open a bigger role for the already important role that the American IOCs will play, the Chevrons, the Exxons, the Conocos, and the like, but also some medium-sized and even smaller companies, like the Canadian type of companies that will enter into, particularly in sort of short cycle, brownfields in the region in which there is tremendous potential. And as Ali said, I mean, the case of Venezuela, for example, in conventional oil, there is a lot of potential in brownfields that there is still the spare infrastructure there to really get those barrels out, and those are absolutely essential for the recovery of Venezuela if it's gonna happen. And so I agree totally with that point. Nevertheless, I do see, and this goes back to a question that you mentioned before, a role for China and maybe other national companies like maybe from India, or we know that Malaysia and others, smaller players by Japan and others in the region, because of they pragmatically they need the resources. And even though China has had a lot of mishaps in Latin America, in particular in the case of Venezuela, but also to some extent in Ecuador, I think they will, they have a need for these resources, and so they will continue to play a role. But I do agree with Ali that these countries will probably fare better if they go into the route of attracting private investment, and of course a variety of investors is always healthy in different types of oil and gas opportunities. I do also think that the energy transition presents, quite a different challenge. Policymakers in Latin America have this view, as Ali said, of the 70s view of resource nationalism, that we have a treasure, and foreigners want to take advantage of us and the like. And even though the energy transition is still decades away in terms of fulfillment its potential, I mean, we are moving in that direction. And for these countries that are dependent on oil and gas to continue to focus on national companies and sort of big long-term projects, I think it's not it's not going to be viable, and it's a great risk for them. So they have to figure out how to change their environments, how to change their thinking, and to attract private investment and share some of those risks, and particularly in some of the longer term projects that it doesn't make sense to for example for Pemex to get significantly into deep waters. So I think there has to be a significant change in the mentality in Latin American governments.
What about regional integration as yet another variable that should be part of the enabling environment? So we've seen this as an aspiration for the region. Governments, ministers speak every year about the lofty goal of integration in the region. There's progress with some electricity grid integration, pipelines that obviously connect producers to consumers in the region. But it seems that it will be very difficult to get to the full promise of renewable energy markets, distributed energy, without also an integrated grid and greater cooperation. So we are in this situation in which we have like-minded countries that, if you will, they are more statist and nationalist, that mention these type of things. And we have more market-oriented countries that are have a different perspective. In the case of South America, we have countries that are more integrated into the Atlantic basin and others into the Pacific basin, and some closer to the Caribbean. What would be the prospects for integration, and what can they mean for energy trade in the region? Ali, do you have a perspective?
Sure. I wish I had the map showing the integration of North America, which is Canada, United States, and Mexico. How the energy transfer between the three countries. Actually, BTU of gas is being used in Mexico, maybe coming from somewhere from Canada and vice versa. The point that you're making is excellent point. Regional integration has been a challenge for Latin America, not necessarily from energy sector, from all aspects of it. Actually, the region hardly got any integration. You look at it, if you want to travel, even air travel, to one of the countries, you have to travel to Miami most of the time, or you have to travel to one of the major cities like Mexico City. That integration never happened even on the public commodity side of it. If you look at the pipeline system right now, there is few are built. If you look at country like Mexico with large gas resources, and you look at the country in the Central America, Nicaragua, El Salvador, all the way to Panama, they're burning oil. And natural gas can easily flow from Mexico going down. And Mexico, with large natural gas, depends on the US and Canada. Therefore, your point is absolutely critical for any type of energy, regardless of renewable or non-renewable, how you can make this region to integrate it. About 2000, we tried to connect Venezuela to Colombia via a pipeline. And there is only a short pipeline that connects Venezuela to Colombia to move the gas in both directions. Trust me, I was involved in that. The challenge of getting that through was worse than any challenge I had during my 40 years career. Because again, politics, policy play a significant role. Latin America energy sector is stuck in 1970s of nationalization, and they need to come out, as Francisco articulated. Got to look at it, this is a commodity that got to create job, got to create opportunity for the people, get the economy on the different track. That's how Brazil has been successful. Therefore, your point, integration got to be addressed at the different level, not only at the energy level.
You know, you made me think of my own experience between Mexico and Central America. Quite a challenge to move forward as well with pipeline for natural trade, pipeline integration, and electricity integration. But it is happening. We're seeing actually greater grid integration going from Mexico all the way to the Andean countries. So some of it is possible. And you also reminded me of something that I wanted to say. It's partly difficult to speak about the region. I said it was vast, but just to give you an example, it's a 9-hour flight from Mexico City, the northernmost capital,
Correct.
to Buenos Aires, the southernmost, and it's the same as from Mexico City to London. So a lot of varieties in between.
Right.
But Francisco, what's your view on integration for the region?
I agree. I mean, it's extremely important. It's tremendously important, in particularly for the energy transition, to integrate the grids. As you said, there has been some interesting developments. Colombia is exporting, electricity. We have some connections in the southern cone. And also, important to connect the gas, natural gas, the pipelines. But in the past, we have seen all these, troubles. Argentina was a big exporter of natural gas to Chile, but then they sort of basically left them without gas, and that destroyed a lot of the trust. Similarly, Bolivia changed the contracts, and now Bolivia seems to be having trouble to get their natural gas potential out, because Argentina now has their own gas, and Brazil is trying to develop also the potential coming from the pre-salt into the gas, the associated gas. So the region has to do much more on this. But the leadership, I mean, I am shocked. Latin American leaders used to meet like every other month during a part of the last decade, because they had all these leftist friends together. But now there is almost no interaction between the Latin American countries. We have López Obrador look at totally inward, never travels anywhere. We have Bolsonaro that only looked to Trump, and now he's gone, but it doesn't have any significant leadership in the rest of the region. Of course, Venezuela is destroyed. And the countries with the current crisis seem to be focusing inwards instead of outwards. So I totally agree that we need much more integration in the region. We have been talking about it for years, but it has to be pragmatic. It has to be market-oriented, but it does require some leadership in public policy, and as the obstacles that both you and Ali mentioned of how difficult it has been to develop some of these private projects.
And it seems that trust has been also, all these projects require trust, long-term trust. And it's very difficult to get it among governments that don't see eye to eye, that have many border issues still to be solved on the one hand, that ideologically are different, and with rules that, as you have mentioned, are not exactly welcoming for private investment and greater flows of capital. I myself, paying attention to the region a few years ago, was very surprised or puzzled that with all this potential, with all these resources and this possibility for integration, for example, on natural gas, many of the new investments were about importing LNG from other regions, as opposed to realizing, making a reality the pipeline interconnections that would strengthen energy security in the region. So this remains quite a challenge. So we are at the edge of our time slot here, and I would like to ask you to give us your final thoughts, your closing remarks. You have, each of you, about a minute and a half. So Ali, please.
Well, I want to leave everyone with the idea that Latin America is got a tremendous potential. It's a friendly, got a friendly environment for investors. People they got a talented, educated people. They're very familiar with the energy sector. They've been an exporter. We just got to work harder in Latin America to bring more confidence to the private capital to flow into Latin America. But let the data speak for itself. And I encourage everybody to go take a look at the publicly traded company, and the company is major company that they do have position in Latin America. Their performance, I think you can see, is in par or better than any other region. And I'll leave you with this. Latin America attracts a lot of headlines, and some of them are hugely negative and impact the business. Take a look at it. We heavily rely on the leftist government or not leftist government and all that. My 30 years experience in Latin America, I can tell you, the security and political side of the Latin America is manageable. It just needs the potential of bringing the investors back to the region. And I think we see the development of the resources. That development of resources is essential. Essential for countries like Venezuela, it's essential for countries like Ecuador, Argentina. Some of them desperately need that investment to come in. Some of the major are doing it in this country. We hope some of the private capital, and we are part of it, to bring more money to Latin America. I'm very optimistic about the region, and we're going to work hard to make sure that become a reality.
Wonderful. And Francisco.
Yes, just to close, I again agree the importance of for this region of the oil and gas industry, the tremendous potential, the fact that a lot of business opportunities are there to be done, and Ali himself, showed during his tenure at Chevron that that a company can manage and the risk and mitigate the risk. Nevertheless, I'm concerned about the politics of it. I am a little bit concerned that for the Biden administration, Latin America will not be a priority. But if we can get our act together, Venezuela could be one of the biggest stories in terms of oil investment in the region, the same as Mexico and Argentina, and of course Brazil, and of course we have these massive plays by Exxon, for example, in Guyana, that are also changing the perspectives of the region. So a lot of potential, but some significant risks.
Thank you very much. I take from this that these great opportunities that are in Latin America can be seized if governments create this enabling environment, and maybe Latin America can be back on the map for investors beyond what the successes that we saw, especially in Brazil, at some point in Mexico, if we get an enabling environment that welcomes much more creativity, innovation, and resources around the energy value chain. And let me thank as well Gulf Intelligence, the UAE Energy Forum, the government and Minister of the UAE, the Minister of Energy, for inviting us to this event. And I look forward to having this conversation with you again in other forums, but certainly next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you.